So recently I got a comment from someone talking about how a piece of software that I run isn't minimalist because of the number of lines it has in its code base. And I don't think this person's entirely wrong, but I don't think they're right either. And today what I'm going to talk about is the different sorts of categories of software minimalism. So if you're new to this channel, remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below because it'll really help the channel out. I'm aiming for 1,000 subs and any help would be really appreciated. So now that's out of the way, let's get started. Good afternoon everyone and welcome back to the channel. So the software in question, I'll just show you what it is. It is my prompt right here. So this is Spaceship. So the specific problem this person had was that Spaceship isn't minimalist because it has more lines of code than his entire ZSHRC file. And while that's an argument against it being minimalist, here's my argument that I don't really think that actually holds water. So what I'm arguing here is this piece of software is minimalist in its aesthetic look. So if we just take another look at it, all we have here is the path that we're on. So if we cd into, say, my pictures folder, it now just says the path and it has a little prompt text to like separate them into like different sections. If I was to go into, say, my Repos folder, into ST for example, it'll have some Git stuff on there. It's nothing like too complex. It's kind of there just telling you, oh, you're in a Git repo. Okay, there's changes that need to be made. There's not all of that extra stuff that a lot of prompts will have where it's taking up the entire status line and then you end up having to put your command on the next line. And that's where I'm arguing that this actually is a minimalist piece of software. So, as I said, I think it's minimalist in its look. And someone might argue that's not the case either. So the big thing with software minimalism is a lot of it is relative and a lot of it is compared to what. So if you're coming from, say, KDE and you look at something like i3, for example, the i3 window manager, not the CPU obviously. If you look at the window manager, i3 is very, very minimal if you're comparing it to KDE or if you're comparing it to XFCE, because all you get with i3 is you get a hotkey daemon, you get a window manager, you get an application launcher, you get a bunch of stuff. Not a lot, but compared to KDE, which comes with all of this extra stuff. Actually, you don't even get the application launcher with i3, that's kind of optional. You're going to need it to open stuff, so we'll just assume that you get the application launcher. But KDE will come with your window manager, your file browser, your terminal, your compositor, your settings, all of these stuff. And if you're comparing i3 to KDE, it's minimal. And not just because of the number of lines in its code base, because yeah, KDE will have obviously more lines than i3 does. But that's not the argument that we're making here. The argument I'm making here is that i3 looks more minimal. So it doesn't do as much aesthetically as KDE does or XFC or any of the desktop environments do. And that's my argument with Spaceship here. It's not as minimal as running a PS1 prompt, for example, because that can be done in a single line. This has probably hundreds of lines to actually parse through. But because I'm disabling most of the modules within Spaceship, it has this very minimalist look, even if the way that it's written isn't minimalist. So I'm not making the argument against software minimalism based on the number of lines. There is a place for that as well, but I think that argument's kind of overblown. So the thing about the number of lines in a piece of code, or a code base, is you can basically put every single program on a single line. So if you've never done any programming before, you may not know that you can actually write an entire program on a single line. So typically the way that you segregate lines is, through a line break, so you go down to the next line. But with something like C, Java, C++, even Python, I think you can do this, JavaScript, pretty much every language that people use, you can use some form of separator, like a semicolon or something like that, to write all of your code on a single line. And this is typically what's done when you want to actually compress a file a lot, because those extra lines don't really do anything and they're big characters that you don't really need. So if you want to compress a file as much as possible, you're going to put it down onto a single line. So because of that, I don't think the number of lines in a code base actually matters, because if you really want to, you can write, say, for example, ST right here, which is my terminal. If I wanted to, I could compress everything down to a single line. It's going to take just as long to run, but it's only going to have one line compared to a couple thousand lines. And the other thing about the number of lines in a code base, it doesn't say anything about how quick the application actually runs. So this might sound weird, but a program with 100 lines can run slower than a program with 100,000 lines. So here's my argument. So it's going to depend on the sorts of algorithms you're using. If you're writing something terrible within 100,000 lines, it's going to run slow, obviously. But if you write something just absolute garbage in 100 lines, and it runs slower than 100,000 lines, that has nothing to do with the number of lines that your piece of code has. It has to do with how well it's written. If you have loops that run through an entire database instead of stopping once it finds exactly what it needs, that's obviously going to take longer than something that stops where it needs to. Now, I'm not saying that the number of lines doesn't matter whatsoever. I just think that it's a problem that's way overblown, especially with something like Spaceship. Because I'm disabling most of the modules, most of the condition checks are going to fail. So that means that most of the code isn't going to be run. So even though it has all of these lines, because I'm failing every single condition check by disabling most of the modules, even though that code's there, it's not going to be run, so it doesn't actually matter. Yes, the file itself is going to be bigger. I'm not making that argument. If, say, I have a script that echoes out hello world, and then under that has a function with 1,000 lines in it, and then I have a script that just echoes out hello world, which one is more minimal? The one with 1,000 lines that echoes out hello world, or the one with one line that echoes out hello world? Now, it's going to depend, obviously, on how you're defining minimalist. So if you take the number of lines, then obviously the one with one line has. And if you're going to go by file size, then obviously the one that has one line has. But if you're going to go with, say, speed, for example, these programs are going to execute at the exact same speed, because that entire function that has 1,000 lines is never being run because you're not calling the function. All you're doing is echoing out hello world. Now, obviously, it's going to take slightly longer to parse the file if you're using an interpreted language. Sure, there's an argument to be made there, but if you're using a compiled language, then because that function's never actually run, the compiler is going to just completely ignore that. So the software minimalism argument isn't as simple as some people would like to make it out to be. And then you've also got the argument surrounding the Unix philosophy, where you have a program that does one thing and does it well. So if you take, for example, BSPWM, if you're looking at that compared to, say, i3, BSPWM is more minimal. Regardless of the number of lines, regardless of anything else, if we're talking about the Unix philosophy in this case, then BSPM is more minimal because it only is a tiling window manager. If you want to have a hotkey daemon, you need to find another hotkey daemon, whereas i3 is a tiling window manager and a hotkey daemon. So that's that sort of argument. So I think I've pretty much talked about all the different types of minimalism. We have number of lines, we have file size. I didn't really cover that one that much because those two are kind of intrinsically linked together. Obviously, you can compress that extra file size out if you know that code's never going to be run, but we're not going to talk about that for today. So we've got number of lines, which is linked to code size, and then you've also got the Unix philosophy, and you've got the aesthetic simplicity or aesthetic minimalism. So I think that might be pretty much everything to cover. Obviously, these categories aren't set in stone. I kind of just made up these categories myself for the sake of the argument. You may have your own sorts of categories. You may completely disagree with me. You may think that the only thing that actually matters is the number of lines in your code base and nothing else matters. If a code base has more than X number of lines, then there's no point using it, which is what a lot of the sockless utilities are like. I think it's DWM, which has said that it will never go above X number of lines. I don't remember how many lines. It doesn't actually matter. But if there comes a time when it has to go above those number of lines, if they really wanted to stop it, all they have to do is just start writing all on one line. Now, I'm not saying that that's a good idea. I'm not saying that doing that is going to make your code base any faster or any slower. All I'm saying is that if you have an arbitrary number of line limit, then there will come a point, if you keep adding features to it, that you're going to have to start doing some hacky stuff, even if it's not going to affect the speed of the application just because you want to maintain your software minimalism meme. So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover for this video. So if you like this video, remember to smash that like button and leave me a comment down below letting me know what you think. If you want to see more videos like this, remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below because it'll really help the channel out. I'm aiming for 1,000 subs and any help would be really appreciated. Up on that corner, I've got the playlist this video is in, so go check that out if you want to see other videos like this. Down below, I've got all of my social links and also my support links. So if you'd like to support the channel or see any of those, go check those out. I've also got my library if you want to see my videos on a platform that isn't YouTube. So go check that out if you want to see a free and open sourcey, like, blockchain-y platform. And I think that's pretty much everything for this video. So, I'm out.